And welcome to everyone. It's good to be here with you again. A couple announcements. This Saturday, there's a webinar, The Coronavirus Revisited. Basically, what we've learned about the coronavirus through our experience for the last year. And also, lots of people are asking about the vaccination, what my thoughts are, and I'll share some thoughts I have about that as well. So we hope to see you there this Saturday morning at 10. Then we have our second conference. We had the fall conference, which was a great success. We had wonderful feedback. We had a great group of teachers. So now we have a new group of teachers, a new theme uh, about to feel better naturally, basically what you get from practicing macrobiotics. And so that's going to be from March 5th to the 7th. And also we have some new teachers. My son Joe will be teaching on it. Gina Campella, who does shiatsu, will be there to talk about the body rub and other things. Tom Monte, which a lot of you know, an author, lecturer, counselor, and also Betty Minkin, who is behind Tohum Tahini, and she has some fascinating things. So, anyway, it should be a really great seminar, and Susan and I will be there, of course. And we're going to continue these free webinars. And I thought the best thing to do would use our book as a guide, because, and I'll talk more about the book later. I mean, the ultimate guide to eating for longevity, because for us, it's such an important work. And so the first one will be connecting with the spirit of health, because macrobiotics is guided by the spirit of gratitude, and wanted to figure that'd be fitting to start the next, leg of this free webinar series. So tonight, what's unique about SHI Macrobiotics? First of all, our name, Strengthening Health Institute. And I don't know what could be more important right now than strengthening our own health, our physical health, our immunity, but also our mental health, our ability to think clearly, figure things out, and make clear decisions for the future. Because as everyone knows, we're living in a very strange time. I never thought I'd see what's going on now in my life, and the changes we've seen in the last year is totally taken me by surprise. So, at any rate, Strengthening Health Institute, which we came up with that name back in the 90s, to me, could never be, more appropriate. So, first, a little bit of a brief history. George Ohsawa, the founder of modern day macrobiotics, began to spread macrobiotics in the 50s and 60s. He came to the US to visit the Kushis first time in 1959. And according to Fia Kushi, one of Michio Kushi's son, he said, George Ohsawa saved my life, because before Ohsawa came, the Kushis didn't even know cheese wasn't a healthy food. There was practically nothing to eat. They were living basically on buckwheat and cheese. So he came the year that Fia was born, and he said, well, George Ohsawa saved his life, which there's actually something to that. Well, we've come a long way since then, but George Ohsawa appealed to people in the 60s and 70s. He certainly appealed to me, because that was the time of the hippies. It was a changing time in America, probably similar to now, the time of the Vietnam War. And there was a lot of questioning about life and values in society going on. George Ohsawa had this incredibly strong expression. And when I picked up his book, and he said, if your health or sickness or your responsibility and your ability. So whether you're healthy and happy or sick and unhappy is up to you. And here's how you do it. And I thought I had relatively good health. I mean, I learned a lot more from getting involved in macrobiotics, but I certainly was not a happy camper. And so I thought, okay, I really want to change my life and become more happy and productive, creative. And George Ohsawa was very severe in his recommendations, and everyone thought, including myself, that you had to start off with diet number 7, all grains, to really get into macrobiotics. So after a number of failed attempts at diet number seven, I finally met some macrobiotic people that said, why don't you add some vegetables from the beginning? You can worry about diet number seven later, which I did. But the thing that's interesting about diet number seven is everybody was looking for something that was life changing, basically to blow your mind at the time. And what was more life changing than 10 days of brown rice or 10 days of grains? It certainly turned my life around and really started the initial group of young people that were passionate about macrobiotics. And then George Ohsawa passed in 1966, the year before I found out about macrobiotics. And the Kushis from that time, Micho and Aveline, started to become much more active. And I was fortunate enough to meet the Kushis in February, maybe it was early March, around February of 1969, hear them teach, which changed my life. So they began to open up. They realized George Ohsawa's approach was too restrictive, it was too strict. It needed to be open and adapted. And they did a lot to really change macrobiotic practice. 10 diets became the standard macrobiotic diet, and Michi used to call it in the early days coffee flavored macrobiotics, meaning coffee was thought was a no-no, so it was his beverage of choice. So we had our coffee flavored macrobiotics, which was much more open. But there were two things: as much love and respect as I have for Ohsawa and the Kushis, George and Lehman, and Micho and Aveline, and all the other teachers, the approach overall really was too restrictive. And it gave the idea that it was about perfection and all or nothing. And even to this day, I mean, I have to tell my clients again and again, this is not about perfection. This is not about restriction. This is about creating health supporting habits over time and going at your own pace. So the approach, whether it was meant to be or not, because many conversations with Peter and Evelyn, they were trying to make everything more open, more flexible. But still, the basic idea was based on too much on food. What do you eat? Every time in a lecture, if Michio would ask a question to somebody and they couldn't answer it, say, what are you eating? Or what have you been eating? And so everything always came back to food repeatedly. And of course, I was part of that. You know, I even used to, when I see Michio, I'd wonder, is Michio going to criticize what I've been eating or whatever? But at any rate, then when I moved to Portugal in the early 90s, I was able to get away from things and I got new ideas, which became strengthening health. And the idea that I got sitting on the beach in Portugal, just watching the waves, is that if we turn everything around and start from the beginning, not from the periphery of the spiral, not trying to move in and refine and perfect our practice, but start simply by adding things. First, adding things from our diet, then adding things from our eating habits, then in our activity, our lifestyle practices, and our environment. One by one, we start to add things, which means instead of a closed spiral, it becomes an opening spiral. This means it's based on a positive, not a negative. If we base something on restriction, it means it's based on a negative. It's hard to continue. If we base something on an opening, expanding spiral, it's a positive. There's really no end in sight because there's all these new discoveries, which means, so, I can't tell you how many times I was in a restaurant or a coffee shop and somebody would come up to me and say, are you allowed to eat that? Is that okay to eat? Well, I don't know. I'm eating it. I hope it's okay. But the point is, there is no it's okay, it's not okay. It's what do we want to choose? So with the strengthening health method, we start out by planning our meals around grains, vegetables, and soups and adding other things. But then what we brought into it very strongly is how you eat is every bit as important as what you eat. And they can't be separated. So this is really important to understand our approach to eating, which now people say mindfulness, our approach to eating helps us make healthy and balanced food choices. And what I realized when I was formulating these ideas If you have grain and vegetable-based meals followed by soup, and you have structure, eat at regular times, and have an orderly life, automatically start creating a balance and you create a new pattern. Now, this approach allows you to be vegan if you want, completely vegan. It allows you to include fish, but it also allows you to include animal and dairy foods if you so choose. It's not my recommendation, but it's a choice. Let's say in a family, let's say you want to be a vegan, let's say your partner doesn't. You can still have grains, beans, vegetables, and soups and other foods together, and your partner or your kids can then eat other foods, and you're still practicing macrobiotics together. It's really about choice and understanding about how we want to live our life and understanding how food affects us, what kind of choices we want to have. So, this approach, the strengthening health approach to macrobiotics, I think gives the ultimate flexibility and also can unify many different ways of eating. I mean, you can be a partial paleo and still have some grains and starchy vegetables. So you still have a meeting, a common point with other groups of people. And I think this approach is really so the heyday of the Kushi macrobiotics was the 70s and 80s up into the 90s. Then the strengthening health approach really has come to the forefront. It's a third iteration of macrobiotics from the 90s. But the difference is it doesn't deny or doesn't diminish anything that comes before because it's based on respect. Respect at everything that's come before us, which I'll get back to. So it's basically a new model. It's open. Then the next change that we made is that I think the Japanese influence in macrobiotics was too strong. Now, I've said in previous webinars, all the world's long-standing civilizations followed the same dietary pattern: grains, beans, vegetables, together with seeds, nuts, and fruits, together with naturally pickled and fermented foods, mild beverages, and mild sweets. That's the pattern throughout the world for more than 10,000 years, with little to none in some cultures, animal and dairy foods. Certainly, very, very little before the Industrial Revolution. Now, Japan has the greatest health and longevity of any country, and they follow the same pattern, except they use sea vegetables and soy products. So the incorporation of sea vegetables and soy products into macrobiotics certainly makes perfect sense from a health standpoint, from a nutritional standpoint, also from a taste and enjoyment standpoint. But at the same time, they're not required. They're choices. We can just, have the grains, beans, and vegetables and such without them, or we can combine them. So what we've done is very consciously, Susan and I, in the Strengthening Health approach, is try to acknowledge and respect the world's longstanding civilizations and to bring all types of cuisine, all types of Asian cuisine, Indian, Middle Eastern, European, North and South, East and West, and Africa as far, North Africa and the rest of Africa, because they all have the same dietary pattern. So respecting all of these, however, the Strengthening Health approach respects the principles of macrobiotics that were started by George Ohsawa and expanded on by the Kushis and other teachers in certain ways of still relying on the unifying principle as the basis, relying on the physical classification of yin and yang, which some people don't agree with, but I think is Ohsawa's most brilliant insight, and so-called Shindo Fuji. We are one and inseparable from nature and the environment. So in other words, the importance of indigenous foods. Now, if you go to vegetarian or vegan approaches, they don't really think about indigenous foods, but many people are trying to adapt and modernize macrobiotics, don't either. that is not a part of their teaching or their practice. And I think that's a huge mistake because Lao Tzu is one of my strong influences, strong teachers. And Lao Tzu said, move your cart along old ruts. And that's always guided my practice. Look to tradition first, then see how it applies now. Is it suitable now? Can we adapt it for now and into the future? So George Ohsawa's basic principles are what's unique about macrobiotics overall and included in SHI macrobiotics. So we try to have great respect for what's come before. But one thing that I realized along the way that's very important is Japan is an island country. Island countries are unique, like Japan, Great Britain. They have a uniqueness that's different from continental because in island countries, they're dominated in macrobiotics, we say, by heaven's force. They have more gathering energy. They have natural tendency to move to the left. Where continental people are naturally, by nature, more open. We move more to the right. It's their natural movement. And I started to realize because so my family was from the Ukraine, and my mother was a wonderful cook. And even though as time went on, I became a total junk food eater, I sometimes would just watch how she made certain things, especially after I found out about macrobiotics. And I thought, she's doing this very differently from the way that we do it. You know, why? Why is that difference? And I realized this is continental cooking and there's certain differences. So, for example, sauteing with oil in the beginning or adding oil at the end, the effect is opposite. At the end is more continental, and in the beginning is more for island countries, more Japanese style or Asian style. So, at any rate, we started to try to adapt it so it'd be more adaptable to larger number of people throughout the world. Then the next thing about it is it's more lifestyle oriented. As I mentioned, we put incredible emphasis on how you eat. So, for example, when someone sees me for counseling, I ask them the same questions. After 2 months, if they come back for a second visit, or after 10 years or 20 years, do you sit down and eat? Do you eat at regular times? Do you not eat before bed? No, it's how we eat determines what we eat. They're inseparable. Together with that, the emphasis on walking outside in the body rub, because people that do these things together always have more benefits. Then the next thing is that now there's great emphasis on science, and people are looking to science. I have great respect for science and for modern medicine as well. But at the same time, macrobiotics is based on tradition and human experience, the understanding and interpretation of our collective human experience. And when we combine history and human experience together with science, then we can create a new medicine for the future. We have both sides because science can refine and some places focus, in some cases improve what we're doing in macrobiotics. One example of that is now a lot of the prominent MDs and researchers are saying no oil, not now, not ever, don't use oil. Then is that accurate or not? Well, in macrobiotics, for a lot of people with serious health problems, then um, we don't recommend oil in the beginning, but over time we do. And oil, sesame oil and olive oil, have a 6,000-year history in civilizations that have great health and longevity. So, is oil important or not? Well, my answer is yes, it is important. However, how we use the oil is also important. And one thing that science has discovered or made prominent is the heat of oil, the importance of not burning oil, which has changed our approach. So when we saute in the beginning, we add oil, we add the vegetables, we add oil, turn on the flame, add the vegetables, then add water immediately before the sizzle. That way it spreads the oil, you don't have to use too much, and the oil can't get too hot. And that totally transforms the nature of the oil and its ability to be absorbed in the food. And if you eat in restaurants, a signature of restaurant cooking is they burn the oil. They put the food into the sizzling pan, which makes this very exciting energy and gives that part of the taste of restaurant cooking, but it's not healthy. Together with that, there was a big reliance on frying in early macrobiotics. For years, we had an oil pot on the stove. We did a lot of deep frying, a lot of tempura. We don't have an oil pot anymore. We haven't had one for years because too much roasting, too much frying really is not good for our health. Now, were traditional people wrong? No. Two differences. One, they had a very strong outdoor life, contact with nature, and very, very physically active. That's number one. Number two, the pollution now is like they didn't have in the past, all kinds of pollution. The modern world is heating up in every way. Not global warming, but heating up as far as industry, as far as people's tempers, as far as everything. So we have to be careful about too much fire, too much heat, too much roasting, frying, and cooking. So at any rate, if we combine the history of human experience with science, if we have mutual respect, but the problem is now, many people within macrobiotics have respect for science. But up until now, science, with few exceptions, don't have that much respect for macrobiotics. Now, there are a few very important exceptions. Colin Campbell's one of them. He wrote the foreword for a book. And I had this conversation with him a number of times about history and science coming together. So I think hopefully moving now into 2021, we're going to find a new openness where there'll be more openness from the science side, and then we can combine these to make something really unique for the future. So, final thing is our book, The Ultimate Guide to Eating for Longevity. It's never been more important. We wrote this book to be the go-to book for healthy eating, healthy living, and healthy, delicious cooking to move us in the future because food consciousness, food awareness has never been so great, but it's going into so many different directions, and many approaches, frankly, are not going to lead to health. We know in macrobiotics, because we have three generations we've seen, people like myself who've gotten together, had children, those children have gotten together with others and had children, three generations. We can see each generation is stronger and healthier and brighter than the one before. So we know, not in our mind, not theoretically, by experience and observation, what we're doing is working generation to generation. However, with so many approaches now, we don't really know that, whether it will. We don't have enough time. So we wanted a way that we could bring all this together and to cut through all of the mythology. And that's this book. And I hope you'll take that to heart and recommend this to people and follow these things with their new SHI orientation that's open and embracing. So this, I think, are the things that are unique about SHI macrobiotics. And Tron asked me if I wanted to open it up to questions, and I said, yeah, let's, sure, if people have questions. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you, Denny, for that very insightful discussion. Just as he said, at this time, we will open for questions. Ideally, questions that are in regards to the topic at hand that Denny just covered for SHI macrobiotics or macrobiotics as a whole. This would also be a time to not necessarily ask any questions that are pertaining to your specific medical condition or any counseling questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, we can either take them directly in the chat. There's a little chat function right down at the bottom. I'll send a message here just so you know where to find that. You can type a question directly there. There's also the raise hand feature, which allows you to, showcase that you want to ask a question. Or there's not too many people on the call. I can kind of see everyone on my one screen. You can also just raise your hand like this, and I can either unmute you or we can go forward with that. So I think Annie, is that you, Annie, that you have a question? Okay. So Annie, I just unmuted you and you can move forward to ask a question.
Okay. Hello, Denise.
Hello.
Listen, I wanted to ask you something about the book. I use that book every day because I cook every day. I'm just a little bit surprised that you don't have more recipes. And also, I'm just wondering why it's not a recipes, for example, for winter, for summer, for the spring. Which recipe are more yin, are more yang? So I'm just asking you.
Right. Well, it wasn't written to be a recipe book. It was written originally. It was the complete guide to macrobiotics. Then we changed it to this, and we did expand the recipes, and we'll do more with recipes in the future. But we really wanted to get away of the idea that you had to use yin and yang with macrobiotics, because you don't. If you follow the guidelines of grain and vegetable based meals, followed by soup, followed by other foods, and the structure, you automatically create a balance. And then I think it creates a much more open and intuitive approach. Now, people who are serious macrobiotic students, then yin and yang and the five transformations become very important to get further into depth. But that wasn't the purpose of this book. We have our year-long course for much more in-depth studies where we explore those topics and much more detail about the different cooking styles and combinations, things of that nature.
Thank
I
you.
think that's a very good question.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question here. It looks like from Elaine. The question is, can you tell me what your current standard recommendation is on pressure cooking brown rice? And then also, you mentioned you have no oil pot anymore. So have you completely stopped deep frying and recommending it?
Okay, a very good question. I can't say never deep fry, but we've pretty much stopped doing it because the few times we've just tried it, it doesn't seem to have the same effect nor enjoyment as it did in the past. We really like the much lighter use of oil. Um, and I'm still trying to figure out and about oil. My son Joe has studied it much more than me, and he's going to actually be teaching in the spring conference. And he has some very strong ideas, also based on his research and studies. So I'd be cautious about deep frying or frying. Now, if you live in a far northern climate, I think it becomes different. Or if you're very physically active, it probably changes that. As far as pressure cooking goes, for years, if it wasn't pressure cooked brown rice, it wasn't brown rice for me. Now we got this. My brother, when he still in the scene, gave us this Japanese earthenware pot, Japanese donabe rice cooker. And it took us a while to start to use it, but once we use it now, if it's not cooked in that earthenware pot, it's not brown rice to me. It has a much more delicious, satisfying effect. And we just had pressure cooked rice the other day, and I still find it delicious. But I think pressure is pressure. And since modern life is so pressured for most of us, there's not really an advantage. There's more advantage to boiled rice. And as we recommend, cooking brown rice with another grain, the interaction of the two grains and boiled in the right type of pot, I think is a much more delicious, satisfying rice and healthy too. My clients, do very well with it.
All right, thank you. Our next question that we have, let's see. Let's see. Okay, curious what you recommend as far as quantity of rice per day and veggies to be sure to get the right amount of nutrition on a daily basis. I do not have an appetite because of medication I'm on, but make myself eat 2 meals daily. What should those meals look like? So it looks like there's two parts to the question. Maybe if you want to address the first part.
In general, we recommend to have brown rice often or daily, but for most people, not more than once a day. Second, to always cook brown rice with another grain. The interaction between the two enhance each other. And we recommend to have an equal amount of grains and vegetables, or preferably more vegetables and grains for pretty much everyone. As modern people, basically, sadly, we're getting weaker and weaker, and we do not have the same ability to digest grains as we did in the past, unless you have a very physically active lifestyle. And I've found over the last number of years, people that eat too much grains, it actually starts to create a more acidic condition, stagnates their digestion, and negatively affects their health. So we've done that. We rice several times a week, not every day anymore. I still absolutely love my brown rice. We have grain and vegetable based meals, but I always make an attempt to have equal or more vegetables and grains. I think it works much better for myself and for our clients.
All right, thank you, thank you. Let's see. Our next question that we have asks, can you give us any perspective on Herman Ohsawa and macrobiotics on the West Coast and its history?
Well, Herman Ihara was an early student of George Ohsawa. So basically, Micho and Alvin studied on the East Coast, settled on the East Coast, and Herman and Cornelia on the West Coast. They were wonderful teachers. I used to sponsor them every year for many years to come and do seminars and to come to the Mid-Atlantic Summer Camp to teach. And they're just so different. I mean, I don't really know how to compare them. Herman was a much more like down-to-earth, folksy type person, wonderful personality with very insightful lectures. And Micho was much more like intellectual, and he gave, uh, so it's really hard to compare them. But I think, the East and West Coast and macrobiotics are very different in the same way that, East and West are different. New York and LA, are very, very different. So I think they settled more in their natural places and taught. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Our next question that we have asks, in the macrobiotic diet, it seems that mostly vegetarian foods, you don't cook meat product at all. Is there a reason to insist vegetarian food? And if you cook meat, how often and what kind of meat would you recommend?
Okay. I don't recommend meat. However, some people, because of their health, because of excessive medical treatments, um, have weakened their health to the point where, in some cases, I do think some people do need some meat to recover their strength and health. Then they can make a choice. According to Colin Campbell's research, when the combination of animal and dairy foods hits 10% of our diet, it activates markers that initiate the disease process, so-called epigenetics. Now, Micho's teachings are always that we have 32 teeth, 28 are for grains, beans, and vegetables, 4 are possibly for animal food, incisors, canine teeth, which means 7-to-1 ratio, which means about 12% would be the maximum throughout our history that we could eat for health. So I think somewhere in those guidelines, 10 to 12%, if we go beyond that, we spoil our health. I do think it's possible. I'm not advocating animal food, and I don't want to be misunderstood or misinterpreted, but I do think it's possible to eat a certain amount of animal and dairy food and live a long, healthy life. But the question is, what is the effect on your body, on your emotions, on your mind, and spiritually? It's more that type of question. How do you want to live your life? And, what really makes sense to you? That's more of the question of whether you eat animal food or not. I hope that gives some help. So I am not saying don't eat any animal food. I'm saying it's a choice. What I am saying, plan your meals around grains, beans, and vegetables and other foods we advocate, and then you can choose beyond that. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Very good answer there. Our next question that we have, and I would say we have time after this question maybe for one or two more to try to wrap up around 7:40, then some closing remarks. Our next question, any suggestions for encouraging a cancer patient to adopt macrobiotics? The patient is not ready for counseling. We gave them the China study.
Okay, so I think the China study is really a good way to start. And I think the natural progression from the China study would be the ultimate guide to eating for longevity. And I think they're a perfect complement. See, what's unique? I mentioned Colin Campbell before. He's a man of science. He's a scientist. He's a researcher. However, he arrived at the same conclusions as macrobiotics coming from history and human experience. So if you pursue either direction far enough, you come to the same conclusion. Our natural way of eating is a whole food, plant-based diet, grains, beans, and vegetables, etc. So I think the China study is a wonderful introduction. I think the Ultimate Guide to Eating for Longevity is another. And what was that film recently? I thought it was really good about all the vegan athletes. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but I think that's a very good introduction as well. But the thing about macrobiotics, there's been so many recoveries from so-called terminal illnesses of every type under the sun. So it's good to let people know about that as well.
All right, thank you, Denny. And maybe just one more question. Looks like one just popped up here. So the question asks, in the United States, I heard most rice has higher content of arsenic, and especially brown rice has more of it. Do you have any cleaning method to reduce the intake of the arsenic toxins?
Well, it depends on all rice worldwide absorbs arsenic. It's actually a bacterial problem. It depends on how it's grown. But in the South, southern rice, so Texas, Louisiana, places like that, because of growing cotton before and using arsenic-based pesticides, have a strong arsenic residue in the soil. California rice is much lower in arsenic. So we recommend eating, California rice. Now, we soak the rice and use the soaking water. If you soak the rice and discard the soaking water, you will lose some of the arsenic. If you put extra water in there and boil it and discard that water, you'll lose more arsenic. So if you're really worried about the arsenic, I would get a blood test and see if it's an issue or not. I do know some people over the years that have had an arsenic issue, and I know the vast majority of people practicing macrobiotics haven't. So it really depends whether you're concerned or not. If you're really concerned, take a blood test and use California rice, no matter how you cook it. So I think that's the best thing. And I do think cooking brown rice with another grain, as we recommend, mitigates, because of the phytic acid in the rice, does mitigate some of the arsenic in the rice.
Excellent. And someone commented that, or they asked, was it the Game Changers, the vegan athlete film that you were
Yes.
referring to?
The Game Changers, yes, wonderful movie, love it.
Okay. And it looks like Pat Palmer mentioned Blue Moon Acres, who I think you're familiar with, as a rice that apparently is arsenic free, grown by traditional methods.
Yeah, it's actually a macrobiotic friend, Jim Lyons, Blue Moon Acres, and he figured out how to grow rice. It's dryland rice that almost has no arsenic and almost no cadmium, which is another issue with rice. And it's absolutely wonderful rice. It's pricey, but it's your health, so it's a choice. And we do eat his rice, and we love it. So I highly recommend it. Check it out. Blue Moon Acres.
Excellent. Denny, did you have any final thoughts for tonight?
No, well, yeah. I mean, I hope that so many people, longtime macrobiotic practitioners, have adopted our method and also come to see me, and the changes in them and the feedback I think is wonderful. So I really think SHI Macrobiotics is the way forward to the future of macrobiotics, and can embrace many different ways and things. I think about patterns and cycles. So this 50-year cycle that I'm fascinated with, the changing year was 1916. Then we had the roaring 20s, so huge changing time in society. Next one, 1966, then the early 70s. That was the heyday of macrobiotics, huge changing time in societies. The most recent one, 2016, which means the early 2020s, starting this year, will be the big changing time. So I think now is the time. Maybe it's wishful thinking and maybe it's not. I think not. Now is the time that things are really going to change and open up. That it seems like a dark time in society and life. However, it's darkest before the dawn. So I think a new dawn is coming. Spread the word, and thank you, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tehran. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.